Okay, welcome to the next segment of our U.S. midterm review. Once again, I cannot reteach the entire course, but we can hit a few highlights just to make sure you can check yourself that you're getting the basic storyline. History, never forget, is a story. So if you can teach yourself history, if you can teach history to your little brother, your dog, the mirror on the wall, if you can tell it as a story, keeping all the parts in it and giving it context, it helps you understand it better. Okay, when we finished off last time, we had talked about the Constitution. And as we said, fearful of Shays' Rebellion and all of the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation that showed, a group of people in the new United States said, the Articles are not doing it, we need to rethink the government. They write a constitution in Philadelphia. It is sent out to the states to, to be ratified. As each state passes it, you start to find objections. And so you have Federalists and Anti-Federalists. The Federalists were those in favor of passing the Constitution. Pro-Constitution, pro-strong national government, didn't see the need for a Bill of Rights. If Congress got out of hand, the people would just vote them out of office, they said. They wrote the Federalist Papers, a set of essays or letters to the New York newspapers, explaining in detail each part of the proposed Constitution. Federalist Papers really build support. Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay are the key figures leading the Federalists. This should all be a review for you, right? The Anti-Federalists, as they were called, were not really an organized group. They argued against the new Constitution. They said that the Articles of Confederation were good enough. They wanted, I should point out, strong state government rather than strong federal government. They didn't really approve of Shays' Rebellion. They didn't think it was a good idea, but they were sympathetic to it. They thought they were just sort of misguided, not a threat to the Republic. The Anti-Federalists demanded a Bill of Rights and did not trust the government to stay in bounds without it. They produced a series of essays or letters of their own we refer to them now as the Anti-Federalist Papers, and they were produced under the name of Brutus. You don't really need to know this, but it might help you remember. Brutus, in ancient Rome, was the guy who assassinated Caesar because Caesar was about to become king. And Brutus was seen by many, even in the ancient world, as a kind of hero for fighting tyranny. So when the Anti-Federalists produced their essays, they signed them Brutus. It was common in those days to have a pseudonym, that is, a fake name or a pen name that you wrote under anonymously. The Anti-Federalists included guys like Thomas Jefferson, Patrick Henry, even Samuel Adams and John Hancock, not John Adams, Samuel Adams, were in the Anti-Federalist camp. Finally, the Constitution was ratified. The Anti-Federalists went along with it, but only after the Federalists agreed to the 10 additions, the amendments that we call the Bill of Rights. Now, I mention all of this to you, reviewing it, because the Anti-Federalists in one way go away because now the Constitution's passed and there's no question of that. But this division stays in another way. The Federalists become the Federalists, they're still called that, and the Anti-Federalists become called the Democrat Republicans. Everybody's on board with the new Constitution now, but the Federalists are going to continue to be about strong national government, and the Democrat Republicans, led by Jefferson, will be about, yes, the Constitution, but let's interpret it on the side of stronger state government. So, anyway, we have a new U.S. government. George Washington is first president. Hooray. I also point out, we didn't talk much about it in class, we didn't spend much time on it, but I just mentioned the Whiskey Rebellion. Like Shays' Rebellion, but put down by the new government quickly and easily, proving the new Constitution seems to work. The Whiskey Rebellion was also a group of farmers. Shays' Rebellion was up in Massachusetts. The Whiskey Rebellion was out in the rural end, the far end of Pennsylvania. They didn't like the new tax that the new government was imposing on liquor. It was a way for the government to make money, kind of sales tax. So they rebelled. Washington sent out the new United States Army, actually under Alexander Hamilton. He sent him out to command it. And they quickly put the rebellion down without much trouble at all, which kind of proved that, you know, we don't have the problems of Shays' Rebellion, now we can handle it. Washington is all about neutrality. Remember, the British and the French are at war with one another. At this point, the French Revolution has taken place. The United States is in danger of getting caught in the middle of that. And Washington strongly urges and also follows a policy as president of trading, continuing our trade and business with both sides, and not making a permanent alliance. The minute you make a permanent alliance, the United States is in danger of becoming the little brother of any other country. So, that policy of neutrality will be one that Washington follows, and John Adams, our second president, and Thomas Jefferson, our third president. They each have their own way of trying to do it. They each make their own remarkable blunders in trying to follow it, and they get into all kinds of trouble, but that remains the standard policy. Also under Washington, Alexander Hamilton gets a big role. He's Washington's Secretary of the Treasury, and since the biggest thing that the new government can do is help to create a strong national economy, Hamilton really is the guy who is, got the most work to do, so to speak. Hamilton creates a national bank, the Bank of the United States, as a way to issue official money and control that money supply, managing the economy. As we know, and we did this a lot in class, supply and demand. And so if you have a national bank that issues the only currency that's legal in the U.S., the government can control and put more out into the economy when it needs that and reduce the supply when it needs to do that. Is a new bank constitutional? Is a national bank, I should say, constitutional? Constitution never mentions it. Hamilton says government can regulate the value of money. The elastic clause, remember that? Government can do those things necessary and proper to do its job. That's the stretchy clause. A bank is necessary and proper to regulate the value of money. Therefore, the national bank must be okay. But the Democrat Republicans always say no and fight it. The Supreme Court, under Chief Justice John Marshall, will say in a case called McCulloch v. Maryland, we talked a little about this in class, that the elastic clause can stretch to cover the national bank. Hamilton makes huge enemies. Hamilton's program excuse me, I should point out is to guarantee that the U.S. will pay its debts, that the U.S. will pay the debts of the states left over from the Revolution. So you remember I talked to you about that way back. The new country was going to have to borrow money in the future. Hamilton said, we will guarantee our own debts. We're not going to try to get out of them just because, we changed governments with Articles of Confederation to Constitution. That made investors sure the U.S. was a good, reliable bet. He also said that the U.S. will pay the debts of states left over from the Revolution. That gave the states a reason to support the new federal government. One other thing I mentioned in class, I think, but we didn't spend a lot of time on it. He also promises Southern, that is, Democrat, Republican states that the new capital, will be in the South. Therefore, he creates the District of Columbia. So, the Constitution says that there can be a district that belongs to no state in which the national capital will be. It's a small place, just big enough to put the capital. And Hamilton says, hey, southern states, if you go along with this, we will, if you go along with this program, you let us do this national bank. You may not like it, but you kind of go along with it and support the new federal government. We'll put the new national capital down south. And so they do. They take a little chunk of Maryland and actually originally a little chunk of Virginia together, side by side, and that becomes the new District of Columbia, where the Capitol building and the White House are going to be. Washington never lives there, by the way, because there's nothing there. It's swampland. So it takes until you get well into Adams' term that they begin to build enough buildings down there to move to. Under Washington, you have two parties now. The Federalists, who are pro-national bank, pro-strong federal government, neutral, but kind of lean toward British trade. They're all about business and manufacturing. And they're all about Hamilton and John Adams. And the Democrat Republicans, who are generally speaking anti-national bank, pro-stronger state powers. They're into neutrality as well, but lean to the French when it comes to business. They're pro-farmer, and they're Jefferson and James Madison. This division between this group and this group, they go by different names. The Federalists will later become the Whig Party. The Democrat Republicans will simply become the Democrats. Eventually, they will become the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. But the basic, groupings here around these issues remain pretty much the same till you get to the Civil War. At the end of his first term, at the end of his second term, Washington decides 2 terms is enough, not good to have lifetime presidents, and so he leaves office and makes his famous farewell address. Avoid the spirit of party, that is, put your country first. Cooperate with your political opponents, rather than fight for your party, your state, your region above everything else. Sometimes a party or a region needs to compromise for the good of the country. And his second piece of advice, avoid permanent alliances and foreign entanglements. U.S. can't just go back to being a colony of another country. Permanent alliances, he's afraid, will make us that. Okay, John Adams is our second president. I'm going to run through him fairly quickly. Under him, the cotton gin begins to take hold. We remember the cotton gin comes along, and suddenly cotton becomes extremely profitable. The South goes from growing almost no cotton and having not much but tobacco to being almost entirely cotton. They grow as much cotton as they can, and every state in the South becomes dependent on it. Slavery is suddenly reborn. Slavery had been on the decline, but now it gets a big boost because they're all going to be working on those cotton plantations. Under Adams, you're beginning to get the real industrial revolution taking hold. The cotton gin and interchangeable parts. The new factories that are going to be the backbone of this are going to be mostly in the Northeast. The little creeks and rivers and streams will provide the water power to get started, and later, iron for metal, steel you make from iron, and steam power. Once that starts to be used, you're going to need a lot of coal for the steam engines. The U.S. has an abundance of natural resources, which will make it an emerging economic giant. The biggest thing the U.S. has going for it in terms of industrialization is almost everything you need, as we said, water, iron, coal, lumber. We have huge amounts here. And so the United States grows very, very quickly, economically, as well as starting to attract immigrants. Adams is followed by Jefferson. Biggest thing with Jefferson is the Louisiana Purchase. So if we remember, I'll pull over this here. Louisiana Purchase. This is the point of it. New Orleans is down here. He who owns New Orleans controls the Mississippi because that's how you get out into shipping to the world. He who controls the Mississippi controls the Ohio River Valley and has the possibility of expanding into all of these western states, Arkansas, Oklahoma, what's going to be, nobody knows this yet, of course, but Oklahoma and Kansas and Colorado, and up the Missouri River, which is connected to the Mississippi, taking you through Missouri and Nebraska and the Dakotas and out to Montana. So the Mississippi River is a big deal. Jefferson realizes that if the country is going to advance, and maybe I can move this over a bit, we're going to need to use that Mississippi River because we have to get from all of this area, all of this empties into the Mississippi to get out. He asked Napoleon if he could pay a toll or something to sort of rent access to New Orleans. And as we know, Napoleon says, tell you what, I'll sell you the whole thing. He needed the cash, Napoleon did, and the French really weren't doing much up here. Might as well get rid of it. And so, there you go. By purchasing the Louisiana Purchase, the country is doubled in size practically all the way out to the Rockies in one shot. As you know, Lewis and Clark are sent by Jefferson to go out and explore all of this. They go out, there's nothing out here. So they follow the rivers, they go trails, and with Sacagawea, not only explore some of this, looking at what's the soil, what could we grow out here, what are the native plants, what are the animals, let's meet the Indians and see what we've got going on with that. But they also find, you know what, you can get all the way out to the Pacific. This is not part of the United States at that point. They're on foreign territory when they get out there, but we can see the future. So, this, of course, is just a summary of that. Jefferson buys it for $15 million. Hard to calculate, but you might say it's worth, that would be, $15 million would be about $400 million, $500 million today. If you went around and you tried to buy just the neighborhood around Farrell, you couldn't get much farther than that with $500 million. So it's quite a bargain. Sacagawea, of course, that's the woman who was their famous guide. I'm just zipping through this. You should know all this already, but you can read up on it if you want. The term is not being used yet. Manifest destiny. But the mentality is there. That it's the destiny of the United States someday to go from sea to shining sea. That we, being a great democracy, have a right and an obligation to spread our democracy and our democratic way of life. God has chosen us and given us this land and has given us the right to take it by war, by force, by just sitting on it and defying anybody to move us off, by purchase, to take the whole of the North American continent. And people sincerely believe that. The word comes later, really around the 1830s, 1840s, that you begin to see this. The 1840s was when you really see the term, but the idea behind it is already starting with Jefferson. So, if the cause of that westward expansion was economic issues, the justification was that idea of manifest destiny. During Jefferson's presidency, I just reiterate, you know this one, we talked about it, Marbury versus Madison. Very simply, Marbury versus Madison is a judicial review. The Supreme Court is the last word on what is allowed under the Constitution and what is not, and their job is to hold the President and the Congress to the law, the ultimate law being the Constitution made by the people themselves. And so, Supreme Court has a right to declare a law unconstitutional or an act of the President unconstitutional, and there's really nothing they can do about it except amend the Constitution and change the document itself. Okay, Jefferson will be followed by James Madison as president, and that will get us to the War of 1812, so I'll do that in the next segment.